Good afternoon. My name is Eli. Can you please tell me your name?
My name is Connor. Pleasure to meet you.
Pleasure to meet you, Connor. Now, in this first part, I'd like to ask you some questions about yourself. Let's talk about where you live. Which town or city do you live in?
I live in Paris, France.
Do you like living there?
Not even remotely.
Why?
I find the cost of living prohibitively expensive, and taking public transport anywhere is generally an objectionable experience.
Is there a town or city that you would prefer to live in?
Well, I used to live in Shanghai, and that, to my mind, is probably the nicest city I've lived in, or rather, I enjoyed living there the most. That's not the same as it being the nicest city, but I enjoyed living there the most. And I would love to return there.
Let's move on. Let's talk about taking photos. Do you take a lot of photos?
No, people take a lot of photos of me, but I don't take a lot of photos, generally speaking.
Do you prefer taking photos or being in photos?
Again, I generally dislike both. I did used to model, and I got paid for that. So my enjoyment was directly related to how much money I was paid. But in general, I don't like photographs. I don't like being in front of a camera.
Why not?
I think everyone's a little bit more critical about themselves. Everyone sees flaws in themselves that other people miss. It's like that spotlight effect in psychology. You make an error, you interpret it as being more visible than it actually is. And the same with your flaws, I think. You see things that other people lack and you distort them in your own mind.
How do you think mobile phones have changed the way that people take photos?
It may not be to answer the question directly, but I would say mobile phones have diluted the importance of taking photos. So prior to the advent of cell phones and mobile phones, people took photos of things worth remembering. Whereas now, anything that happens at any time, on any given day, at any moment, for any reason, must be crystallized in a JPEG for all time. Like, oh, here's avocado on a piece of bread. Well, I must look at this forever, and I must send it to everyone I know.
And nowadays, many people like taking selfies. Why do you think that is?
I don't want to be unduly critical. I think I think the way society has developed recently is that there's more of a primacy or an importance placed on the self rather than the collective or society. And everyone has been led to think that, I don't know, their reality or whatever it is that they're doing is interesting. And the reality is it's not. So I think most of social media is like vlogging and blogging, and it's here's what's going on in my life, and people are misled into thinking, oh, this is something I also should do. And yeah, I would say that that's what it is. But I don't think it's stupidity. Some people say it's just, oh, people are dumb. I don't think people are any dumber now than they ever were in the past.
Let's move on. Let's talk about being bored. Do you often feel bored?
Not a second. I cannot recall the last time I ever felt a moment of boredom.
But some people think it's good to be bored.
I'm sorry,
What,
sir. Is that a question?
well, some people think it's good to be bored, but what do you think about that?
I I think if I were to reframe that, I think it's good to take time to be mindful. I mean, on a daily basis, I take a moment to reflect on what has happened, what I'm grateful for, what I'm looking forward to, what I might be worried about, and what I'm doing about that. So I'm not doing anything other than situating myself in the moment. I'm not texting, I'm not listening to anything. Like that's being, I guess, somewhat idle or not being occupied. But I think that's radically different to being bored.
Okay, Connor. Now, in this next part, I'm going to give you a topic and I'd like you to talk about it for 1 to 2 minutes. Before you talk, you'll have 1 minute to think about what you're going to say, and you can make some notes if you wish. Do you understand?
I do.
Okay. Connor, here's your topic. You'll have 1 minute to prepare. All right. Remember, you have 1 to 2 minutes for this, so don't worry if I stop you. I'll tell you when the time is up. Can you start speaking now, please?
Certainly. So the question didn't seem to prohibit me from talking about someone who no longer lives. So the person I chose was Socrates, and that would require traveling back in time. The reason I chose Socrates is the same answer to the question, who is Socrates? And he's the godfather of philosophy, and I guess by extension, all of Western thought. Now, where would we go? We wouldn't go anywhere. In fact, there's a very specific moment in time in which I would actually like to talk to Socrates, and that is maybe around the night before his death, as relayed in the book The Apology by his student Plato. And what we would do is I would actually ask him a series of questions because I think there are a lot of contradictions in Socrates' existence. For example, he preached a life of humility. He referred to himself as being a very dumb man, that he knew less than anyone in the world. Yet, when he was found guilty, he was on trial for essentially heresy in Athens and for corrupting the youth. When he was found guilty, he was given the opportunity for clemency and he rejected it out of hand, when all he had to do was display the slightest modicum of humility. He just had to say, you know what, I was wrong to talk about these ideas, or just compromise. He just had to compromise a little bit. And the man who professed himself to know less than anybody else and who preached unending humility refused to illustrate or demonstrate any humility whatsoever, and in fact chose death. And I would like to ask him, how do you reconcile those two positions? How do you reconcile humility with what I think is rank arrogance? And yeah, that's what I would like to talk to him about.
Thank you. Do you think you ever will spend a day with Socrates?
Highly unlikely, Eli.
Thank you. Okay, we've been talking about a famous person you would like to spend a day with, and I'd like to ask you some more general questions related to your topic. Let's consider, first of all, spending time with others. So, there are some people that like to spend time primarily by themselves, and there's others that like to spend a lot of time with a vast array of different people. What do you think are the advantages of spending time with a lot of very different people?
Oh. So again, I'm going to take that question to mean spending time with, let's say, cognitively diverse people. So people who know a lot about different things, have different interests. And I would say the advantages of that are you are generally exposed to other ideas. And I think a skill that is somewhat vanishing these days, or is in the process of vanishing these days, is learning to be around people you don't agree with. And that's, I think, a rather useful skill in society, being able to be in the presence of people who might have political or religious or philosophical or legal or cultural beliefs which are contrary to your own, and being able to be civil with those people. So yeah, being around cognitively diverse people, I think is very useful for generating that skill.
I mean, that's a very interesting point, Connor, that you said
Thank you.
we're finding it more difficult to spend time with people that we maybe don't agree with politically or religiously or ethically. Why do you think that is, that we're finding it more difficult nowadays compared to the past?
I would say that is, I mean, people talk about, let's say, the echo chamber effect, where you associate with people who already agree with you, and there's a feedback loop where you hang around with 5 people all the time, and all 5 of you have this. You hang around with 5 other people, and all 6 of you have the same ideas, and you just repeat and reinforce your own ideologies. I would say overarchingly, it's more the way news and events are actually portrayed online, or not just online in print, just in news in general. So news outlets, the way information is presented, it tends to be very polarizing. There's very little nuance, very little gray. Everything is it's black or it's white, and where's the camera? It's black or it's white, and it's designed to evoke an emotional reaction. And I think that there's such not value, there's such profit in presenting information in that way that is all that companies do, and that's all that news outlets do. And when you're raised in that environment, and let's be honest, information is an environment, then yeah, it becomes more difficult to be around people who disagree with you.
So, what kind of active steps can people take to spend time empathizing and listening to a diverse range of opinions?
Well, it's so again, I can only speak from my own experience, but what I what I do and what I have done for a very very long time is I actually buy books written by people who I already know I disagree with. So let's say you're on one side of let's say the political aisle or the political spectrum, or you have very fixed opinions on a certain topic. I will consciously not just read but pay to read a book written by somebody who I already know I disagree with, so that I can at least say I gave that person the best possible chance. I didn't listen to what somebody else said about them. I sat down and I read the book, and often there are places where you'll find common ground or pockets of agreement. And to me, I mean, I've done that for a very long time, so it's easy for me now. But that really has helped me to be exposed to or around ideas that I know I probably won't agree with, but I don't have an emotional reaction to it anymore.
Hmm. Okay, we're just going to have to move on to another topic. Let's talk about role models. Do you think it's
Mhm.
important for young people, especially, to have role models?
No, I think, well, if the role models are people who exhibit good behavior or beneficial behavior or habits which are productive, then sure, that's an absolutely wonderful thing. The idea of just having a role model in and of itself, uh, and I think this kind of comes back to the idea of what exactly constitutes a role model these days. Just is somebody who we all know, someone who has any degree of notoriety, are they a role model? Because that seems to be the standard now. It's like, oh, this musician or this actor, people know who they are. Therefore, they are a role model. It's like this, no disrespect, but this person doesn't know the first thing, or probably doesn't know the first thing about geopolitics, religion, the economy, medical science, philosophy, history, geography, any single branch of knowledge you can name. So why would I look to this person for behavioral cues?
Hmm. I mean, well, the thing is, often with young people, they don't choose role models based on political beliefs or particularly good behavioral characteristics. They'll often choose film stars or athletes. Now, my question to you is, do you think that these film stars and athletes and other celebrities that become role models for young children have an ethical responsibility to improve their behavior and to act in a way that's more in accord with being a positive role model?
No, I don't. And again, I think from the perspective of a parent, or rather, excuse me, I think, comma, from the perspective of a parent, comma, it would be more prudent for you to present better options for role models to your children. So the idea that, sorry, if you're in a position where you know your children are looking at semi-intelligent actors and semi-articulate musicians, and taking, as I said, behavioral, political, philosophical cues and influence from people who have absolutely no idea what they're talking about. The responsibility is actually on the parents to intervene. And again, that's perhaps a bit contentious, but yeah, that's my opinion.
Okay, thank you very much, Connor. That
You're
is the
welcome.
end of the speaking test.
Thank you very much. Have a nice day.
So, how did you feel? How was it going through the test yourself?
Well, I don't think it was my best performance, but I definitely think that was probably the best IELTS test anyone else has ever done.
You think you're going to be a good role model there, Connor?
Yeah, a good role
A
model,
very good
because
role model.
I know everything about everything. So you can look at me for advice.
Were you and Socrates?
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. It occurred to me. It's one of those things. I suppose how to put it, structured thought, where I had this wonderful thought in the back of my mind, and I wanted to use it. This wonderful quote from Socrates, and I thought I'm not going to just use it for the sake of using it, but it would have been nice. And I thought, I suppose that's actually something that you talk about in terms of how you answer a test. Sometimes you have a really nice piece of language or a nice idea, and you really want to use it. It's like, oh, this will sound great. But the thing is, if you just push it in for no reason, or you just awkwardly steer the conversation in that way, it actually makes the conversation less organic and less pleasant. So you had a very nice quote about fame being the perfume of good deeds. And I was like, I'm not just going to say it for no reason. So I'll just forget about it. I'll say
Mm.
it later and people will know I'm smart.
I mean, that, yeah, and that's what you just witnessed, everybody.
That's what I just witnessed.
So, I mean, that's a very important consideration. Do you use language for the sake of using language, or do you use language to best convey your ideas? What would you say, Connor?
Well, that's the thing. So, I mean, we've both encountered in many different contexts a lot of writing samples and speaking samples. And there's often, I think, a misconception that good communication is using as many big words as you possibly can, even if it even if it is or even if you sacrifice grammatical accuracy and actual just overall communication. You just sacrifice the clarity of your communication. Oh, well, that makes it good. As long as there's lots of big words, then it's good. And in fact, that's honestly not how communication works in any language. Communication is mostly succinct. It's mostly uh, very brief, to the point. Unlike everything I just said, I'm aware. But yeah, just to draw a line under it, yeah, I would say that the misconception is, well, I must make this sentence. This sentence must have three non-defining relative clauses for it to be advanced grammar. And no, using the tenses accurately makes it, or using the perfect tenses accurately makes it advanced. For example, or the passive voice accurately makes it advanced. Having page-long paragraphs or page-long sentences, excuse me, does not accurate grammar make.
Mm. I mean, so that's a tricky topic there, because a lot of students look at the public band descriptors for IELTS and they see that they need to use idiomatic vocabulary to get band 7 or above for lexical resource. And as a result, they do exactly what you recommended not doing. They say, this is the idiom, or these are the idioms that I know, and I'm going to tailor my communication to being able to use these idioms. What would your advice for those students be?
Well, well, idiomatic language is contextual. So, for example, it's like accurate idiomatic language is contextual, which means you need to use it in the correct context. If you just use it arbitrarily, then it's not idiomatic language. It's just words that you're throwing into a sentence. So there are many times. I mean, I'm sure we've used idioms so far, but I'm not. I can't think of any off the top. Oh, there we go, off the top of my head. There's one. But in general, again, they happened organically. It wasn't putting one into every single sentence, because again, that becomes somewhat uh, transparent. And again, idiomatic language is generally barely noticed.
Hmm.
So
And
again, I had to actively think. Oh, please.
yeah, and it's barely noticed when it's used in the correct context.
Precisely. Yeah.
But the thing is,
So
examiners are trained to notice that kind of language. So you don't need to go out of your way to use particular phrases that you've learned for the test. By communicating your idea as accurately as possible, you'll be using that high level of language, and the examiner will do the work for you. They're going to pick out on those phrases that you use that are more idiomatic in nature, and then they'll give you the score accordingly.
You have much more succinctly expressed my thought. Yes.
So you used a lot of really nice techniques that I liked in all throughout the test. And I wondered if we could kind of go over some of your questions, and you can just kind of tell me what your thought process was.
Sure.
So one thing that I noticed that you did quite regularly is you worked out the extent of the question. So, for example, in part 2, you said, well, I've noticed that you haven't specified whether this person has to be alive or dead. Similarly, in part 1, when I asked you if there's a town or city that you would prefer to live in, then you said, well, Shanghai is a place I would prefer to live in, but that's not necessarily because Shanghai is a better city. It's more because of my personal experience. Can you tell us a bit about that technique and how students can possibly take in some of those advanced techniques for answering questions?
Well, unfortunately, Eli, that sort of thing is it's inborn. You can't teach that kind of genius. You either you have it, you know what I mean? You have it, or you don't. No, it's very simple. It's certainly not a stalling technique, but it's more. It's called framing in terms of logic language, and even just psychology. But in terms of logic, I'm setting a very clear. Where are my hands? Where are they? There. Boundaries for what I'm going to say, and it is just how even to describe it? It's sort of like meta thinking. How do you describe the way you think about a problem? So I actually don't really even know how to answer that question now that I think about it.
Something that you find yourself doing naturally.
I think it is actually almost certainly, although this is just speculating at this point, I would say it is just a result of studying philosophy. So understanding the parameters of a question. So for the example that you gave about Shanghai, it's like, well, I would rather live in Shanghai, not because Shanghai is a nicer city to live in overall, but I preferred living in Shanghai compared to my time in Paris. So there's an emotional connection there, but the implicit meaning of the sentence is not Shanghai to me is a better place to live. It's just I preferred living there than living in Paris. So yeah, that is actually just logic, and that is something that I suppose I do teach when you're talking about in let's say EAP, English for Academic Purposes, if you're writing an argumentative essay and you have your argument and your counter argument. So your argument is your thesis statement. What are you explicitly saying? And then your counter argument must be a response to that thesis. It's not just to an individual element of your thesis. It's your argument is we should legalize this drug X. Then your counter argument must challenge that idea. Like, no, we should not legalize drug X because it can't just be an individual component of the initial thesis. So I think just teaching that again and again and again, and hundreds of times a year having consultations about, well, does my thesis or does my counter argument address my thesis? And then you just draw it on a piece of paper. The logical connections between ideas. It then just becomes second nature to think, well, what I'm saying here is, and I'm very carefully defining my terms.
Another thing, Conor, I'd like to point out, especially for people watching this, is your technique in part 3, which is the way you infused your personal experience with kind of more general and abstract thinking. So the way you said, I can only speak from my personal experience, and you gave the example of how you enjoy reading books that you don't necessarily agree with, and then how you were able to take that as a concept and then explain how that kind of answers the question of engaging with other ideas that you don't necessarily agree with. Can you
Mhm.
talk a bit about that as a kind of as a kind of rhetoric technique in part three?
The idea of oh, sorry, the idea of taking a personal experience and extracting the principle and then applying it outwardly.
Exactly, especially because
Yeah,
in
yeah, yeah.
part three, often you're dealing with these abstract notions and you shouldn't be talking about personal examples,
Yourself. Yeah,
but you
yeah.
need to take your own experience
Yeah,
in order to talk about abstract concepts.
yeah, of course. And I think the summary, when I tried to confirm what you were asking, the summary is, uh, I think, pretty clear. Where all ideas are going to be interrelational. You're going to call on memories to answer any question. That's all questions or information that you're, or all answers are pieces of information you're recalling. So they're all memories. So starting with, yeah, as I said, like yourself. Well, in my experience, you'll start from there. That's your foundation, and then you build your answer from there. And in the example we gave, which was, what was the example again?
The example was for different opinions.
Oh, different opinions. Yeah. So like, here's what I do, and it's very concrete. Here's what I personally do. I buy a book. I read a book based on somebody or written by somebody I don't agree with. The reason I pay as well is because I want. That's the motivation. If I take it out of if I borrow it from a library, excuse me, I haven't actually invested in it. If I stop reading it, well, whatever. I don't care. I didn't pay anything. When you pay for it, you're forcing yourself to actually absorb the information and pay attention to it. So in that action, that overall action, there are, I suppose, two principles. One, pushing yourself to do something that you don't ordinarily want to do, and two, making sure that there's motivation there. By paying, by parting with your own money, you're forcing yourself to engage more critically with the idea. And then those are the two ideas that you apply more broadly, as you say, to society. So you're starting in the, I suppose, like in the center of a circle, and you're just sort of building ideas outwardly.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much, Connor. Really
You're
appreciate
welcome.
you coming on and doing the speaking test. Hopefully, people are going to be able to learn from a lot of the vocabulary and the techniques that you used in today's test. So, thank you very much.
You're welcome, Eli, and good talking to you.